And what a riveting story. I wonder if there was a CIA connection. We'll talk with Edward about that when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Is this a CIA operation, Edward?
Well, it'd be a lot easier to answer if we knew what the CIA actually did. And that's such a great question, because most of the people who work for the CIA don't really have a full view of what it did. But the document that I find most interesting is something that popped up during the Watergate thing, when the current director of the CIA suddenly realized that he had gotten in front of national television and made a blatantly false statement about something the CIA had done, and he turned to his head of security and he said, I want you to find out what has been going on in this agency that could compromise us, and I want it in an eyes-only memo. And so the only people that even got to see this memo originally were the top 3 people at the CIA. And this memo, according to their language, was called the Family Jewels memo. And in 2007, General Hayden was the CIA director, and he called a press conference, and he said, time to open the kimono. I'm going to show you all the secrets of the CIA by revealing the Family Jewels memo. And the Family Jewels memo had 8 jewels in it. The only problem is they revealed number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Jewel number 1, and this memo covers a period of time that's exactly the period of time I'm talking about in New Orleans, like from 1958 to 1964. Jewel number 1 is 100% redacted to this day. The CIA did something 45 years ago, right at the time frame we're talking about, that is so compromising or embarrassing to them that they are unwilling to tell the American people even a single word about what they did. And so, is this a CIA operation? Was Oswald CIA? Blah, blah, blah. Did the CIA use its money laundering facilities to finance the construction of the linear particle accelerator on the grounds of the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in New Orleans because they knew about the contamination of the polio vaccine? These are questions that I wish I really had answers to, and one day we may. But as long as the CIA refuses to tell us anything about jewel number 1, I can't really answer that fully.
All right, let's go to the phones. Bill on our Skype line is in Honolulu in Hawaii. Go ahead, Bill. Bill, can you pick us up? Well, there will be no Bill on the Skype line now. Let's go to Bob in Falls City, Washington, west of the Rockies. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, George. I remember meeting you up in Falls City, or up in Lake City, book signing.
Yes.
And I had my prostate removed about 6 months before I met you. And I'm still alive and kicking after 4 years. But
Good
the
for you,
question
Bob.
I have for your guest is, I was in school during the time they used the children for guinea pigs. And my parents didn't sign me for a guinea pig, but after the shot was proved supposedly safe, I got the shot. Then when I was later in school, I received the sugar cube. And then also when I was in the military, I received the sugar cube. Is this stuff accumulative, or is it just one dose gives you what you don't want?
Well, in immunity, which is ultimately what this is about, a numbers count is the phrase they use. The more of something that's in your system, the worse it is, if it's something that can attack you. And I have a number of people who communicate with me who got polio from the polio vaccine, and some of them got it in trials that were done before the vaccine was officially released. So there's a really dark history to this whole thing. So when you make the statement about using children as guinea pigs, I, from my own experience in talking to people who were in that situation, have to say that's probably a pretty good description of it. And the shot was worse than the sugar cubes. just because it goes straight into the blood supply. You don't have protection of your intestine there.
When you were putting the book together, did you come across any pitfalls there, anything that was problematic for you?
What do you mean by that?
Well, difficult moments.
For me personally?
No research or anything like that.
Well, the whole project is a brain buster. I mean, I remember the night I was trying to figure out what was going on in monkey virus research around the world. And I was still in Michigan at the time. I drove down to Ann Arbor, and I went to the medical library, and I spent about 5 or 6 hours going through their books there. And every time I opened up something, I mean, this is where I found that book, The Dangers of Handling Simians, that I write about in there, where they talk about, messing around with monkey viruses could cause an altered pathogenesis, in other words, new disease, particularly with the exposure to radiation. And I tracked down the guy who said that. His name was Richard Fines. He was a part of the zoo in London. He was their monkey guy at that. And so he was a primatologist, is what I'm trying to say, a monkey scientist. And after he went to this meeting trying to warn everybody, he says, don't you see how dangerous this is? I mean, we're talking about the possibility of creating a new disease that we won't be able to stop. Okay? And they said, yeah, how much funding are we going to get for doing this? Richard Fines was so disappointed by the response to his warning that he got out of monkey research. He went and lived up on the Arctic Circle and studied wolves for the rest of his life. There's that night in particular, when I realized they were playing viral roulette with the population, was probably the hardest single night for me. There were other things about Mary Sherman. I didn't just jump to this conclusion of what happened to Mary Sherman. It took me a long time to sort out. But when I finally realized that I had the evidence to show that she was not murdered in her apartment and the whole thing was a cover-up, I mean, that was another brain buster of a moment.
You theorized the possibility that Oswald could have been working for Bobby Kennedy. Tell me about that.
Well, the question is, how did Oswald get back into the United States? And the point is that there were major American newspapers that reported that he had defected. And there were lots of people in the government who considered him a defector. And when you defect, you lose your citizenship. And as I started researching this, I realized that there's actually a very clear legal process to determine whether or not you're a citizen or not, whether or not you have lost your citizenship through a particular action. And the officer of the United States government who's capable of doing that, making that decision, making that determination, is the Attorney General. And at the moment Oswald returned to the United States, Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General. And that got me thinking a lot about that. And then I realized that the real issue was that when Jack Kennedy came into office, the CIA was doing stuff they were unwilling to tell the White House they were doing. So what you've got there is you've got a question of, like, who's really running the government? Is it the president or is it the CIA? So he put his brother, Bobby, in an oversight capacity over the CIA to find out what they were doing. And when they got together with the controller, the head accountant for the CIA, they discovered they were missing tens of millions of dollars that were untraceable. So the question was, what were they doing with all this untraceable money? And Bobby needed to spy on the CIA. Now, normally, you just would have called up their FBI and had them do it, because on the org chart, that's the way it's supposed to look. But J. Edgar Hoover was in the middle of blackmailing Jack Kennedy over the Judith Campbell situation. And they were sworn enemies. I mean, Hoover hated the Kennedys, and they hated him. And so they just couldn't call up J. Edgar and say, spy on the CIA for us. They had to get their own assets, their own professionally trained spies, and they had this guy in the Soviet Union who we had sent over there, frankly, who got marooned in the Bay of Pigs turnover. I mean, his sponsors got fired by